we want to update our UI now to use the underscore ID field instead of the manual ID we've been using. There are three main areas that we need to change. We need to change the server API, we need to change the React components themselves, and we want to make sure the server render is also working correctly. So if the strategy is to just go over all the code, we're okay here because we don't have a lot of code. But if you do have a lot of code and you want to do a change of this magnitude, I would recommend to grep in the source control for things that potentially needs to change. For example, we can simply grep and always use get grep because that will grep just in the source code and not in any generated logs or ignored files. And we want to grep for .id, but we have to escape the dot here. Let's take a look at that. So all these cases, except for the last one, because this is just a script, but all these cases are actually cases that need to be changed. So this is a good list. Another thing that might needs to change is whenever we use the ID in search, and in Mongo, we usually do that. So ignoring the test data script, in fact, we can filter this list with grep-v test. So don't show me anything with test. So all of these other cases, so we have these 4 cases, and we have these other cases, and I think we need to go through all of them here. So let's start with the API. We're projecting the ID field here, so we don't need that anymore because we're just using underscore ID. We are indexing our object with ID, so we want to index it with underscore ID now. This applies to contests and names, so it's underscore ID in here. And when we find the list of name IDs, we take the IDs parameter, which is a comma separated ID, and we map them into a number, and then we find them with ID. So we can't map them into a number anymore because they're actually strings, and we need to find them with underscore ID. And instead of mapping them into a number, in Mongo, we have to map them into object IDs. If you want to find anything in Mongo, you have to use the object ID syntax. The MongoDB driver that we're using here also has an object ID function that we can use. And we can simply map this to object ID. So we'll take an array of strings and map them into object ID's objects. When we find a single contest, we also want to find it with underscore ID. And we also want to use the object ID here. And I think this is all good for the API. So let's take a look at server render. In server render.js, we have 2 places we're using ID in here in particular. So this is when we return the data for a single contest. And we're basically saying this is the current contest ID. And here is the initial list of contests that only has 1 contest. So we definitely want to do underscore ID here and here as well, because we're completely not using ID anymore. That's good to go. And now let's take a look at our components. Looks like we need to take a look at app.js and contest preview.js. So in app.js, we can look for where we're using .id, and it looks like this is it when we fetch a single contest, which is related to the API we just changed. So we need to do the same here. So it's underscore ID here and here. And I think these are all the cases in here. And then in contest preview, we are using the ID here. And when we when we click on a contest preview, it fetches that contest. So we definitely want to use underscore ID and use underscore ID in here as well. And the underscore ID here will be just a string. So when it gets exposed by the API, it will be just a string. Cool, so I think we're ready to test. The first thing we should test is the API itself. So let's test both API endpoints that we're using. So we have API/contests, and this one is now indexing with the object ID instead of the manual ID, and I don't see ID anymore. And if we go to one of the contests, so let's go to the first one, we now go to it like this. And it looks like the API is working. Let's make sure that we can use the names endpoint. That endpoint would be /names/value, comma separated another value. And this is working as well, and it's indexing everything with the underscore ID instead of the ID. So I think the API is working correctly. Let's test the application. This one will definitely stop working. We're now not fetching with the ID anymore. So actually, I would expect this to fail, and it did. But it actually didn't fail very well. This route should say 404, not found, right? But right now, it's not returning anything, so we should definitely fix that. But let's test our change first. The initial list of data is rendering. We should also definitely always test offline as well, because we are using server render. Server render is working. So let's go ahead and click on one of these, and the URL is using underscore ID now, and the names are loading with the underscore ID as well. So let's take a look at the case when we have an invalid ID and figure out why it's not returning an error and fix that. So let's track the error that we're getting here. Request failed with status code 500. So that's actually not accurate. We shouldn't really fail with 500 here. We should fail with 404 and send 404 to the user. So let's take a look at our server.js. So in server.js, we are trying to render something, and if we have an error, we just console log it. So that's probably what's going on. Let's fix it. So when you have an error, let's handle it with response.send error. I want to actually see the error in the UI first. So response.send error.toString. And let's take a look at that. And now it's responding with 500 to the user, which is a little bit more friendly, but maybe we should just respond with 404. So we can do status 404 instead of 200 OK and send a message to the user, something like bad request. And also definitely we should always keep logging the error to the console so that we can track it. So now we get 404, bad request, and we are still logging the error to the console in case we want to track it.